Medford residents officials protest church's anti-LGBTQ sign. Members of the trans community and their allies wanted to let them know that their views weren't welcome. So that is the title and subtitle of an article that I have here at boston.com. This is a story that Jason Whitaker brought to my attention, and I thought it would be interesting to share this with all of you and share some of my thoughts, also to get your thoughts in the comments. This is about a church that had a sign in front of their church in Medford, Massachusetts, I believe. The story was posted July 25th, 2021. It says a church sign commenting on gender identity in Medford sparked dueling but peaceful protests on Friday evening. And I love the fact that they always have to put the word peaceful in front of protests nowadays. It seems to me like if a protest is peaceful, then you can just tell when you're looking at the protest that it's peaceful. You don't really need to put that modifier in front of it. But a lot of times they do put that modifier in front of protests today, which is interesting. But it says community members and elected officials gathered outside the New England Baptist Church on Salem Street to protest a sign that reads, so here's the church sign, "Male and female created he them, Genesis 5:2. Gender identity solved." Okay, so it's quoting Genesis 5:2 from the Bible, and I'm going to read the end of Genesis 5:1 into 5:2. It says, "On the day when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and named them mankind on the day when they were created." So the sign here actually is saying something biblical, that God created man and woman, but then it goes on to say gender identity solved. I think that's the provoking statement, and this article will get a little bit into the two sides of this, and I'd really like to hear people's thoughts on this. Was this a good idea to put something like this on a sign? Was it something that gets people thinking and actually causes people to really consider the Bible, or is it just provoking and stirring up people's anger needlessly? I'd like to hear what you think on that. On his website, the article says, Northeastern University journalism professor Dan Kennedy called the sign an anti-LGBTQ message. So there are people taking this sign as really being anti-LGBTQ because it says gender identity solved. No one was demanding that the church remove the message, which is protected by the First Amendment, but members of the trans community and their allies wanted to let them know that their views weren't welcome, Kennedy wrote. Well, that's interesting that he actually puts there that their views aren't welcome. So it's kind of like saying, well, you have the right to say that, but we really don't like the fact that you do have the right to say that, which I understand. I mean, that's part of what freedom of speech is. There are a lot of things people say that that we kind of wish they wouldn't say. On the other hand, to say that your views aren't welcome is really getting into hostile territory. It says a party atmosphere prevailed, at least on our side. We walked in front of the church once and then stood out on the opposite side of Salem Street, waving flags and signs, while motorists honked their horns in support. So, not surprisingly, probably a lot of people in our culture are actually more supportive of the protesters, the LGBTQ community and their allies that are outside the church protesting. Our culture, from what I can see, especially in certain areas, definitely leans heavily in favor of LGBTQ views. So this protest got a lot of support, it sounds like. And then it says Medford City Councilors Zach Bears and Nicole Morrell, as well as Councilor and mayoral candidate John Falco and Mayor Brianna Lungo-Cohen, joined community members to protest the sign. So now you have political officials joining in this protest. And you see some tweets here. Proud to support and stand with our LGBTQ plus community. That was from John Falco. And then Zach Bears, 2468, Medford has no room for hate. I was proud to join so many Medford residents tonight, standing in solidarity with our LGBTQ plus family, friends, and neighbors. Trans rights are human rights. And then here's another one by Nicole Morell. So the article goes on to say, New England Baptist Church pastor Joseph Hawkins told WBZ he doesn't believe they are preaching hate or violence. Now this is a key point here, that from the pastor and the church's perspective, they don't think they're trying to be hateful. They're not trying to promote violence in any way or any kind of a hateful message. He says, this is a message of God's truth and us trying to reveal it to our community, he said. So that's the pastor talking. And then he says, it's almost hypocritical that they can present their worldview and we can't. So that's really a key point, I think, that's being brought out here is, it does seem today like some people are being given the total privilege to say you can say all of these things and it's totally fine for you to say that, but they are based on a worldview. And there are truth claims that are being made. And it's easy for people nowadays to say, well, Christians, what they're saying has no validity. It's just hate speech. There's really no grounds for saying what Christians say. But actually what the pastor brings out here is important. We are talking about different worldviews. And there are truth claims that are being made on both sides. And I really want to point out here that actually there's a lot of inconsistency in our culture. I was actually looking up the definition of gender, and this website has different dictionary definitions. The first ones here are from the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language. And when you look at the word gender here, it does talk about a grammatical category often designated as male, female, or neuter. And then the second definition, the fact of being classified as belonging to such a category. The third definition, either of the two divisions designated female and male, by which most organisms are classified on the basis of their reproductive organs and functions, sex. The next definition does say one's identity as female or male, or as neither entirely female nor entirely male. So what you're really going to get into here as you look at society's definitions, and this is reflected, I think, in dictionaries more and more, is that there are various definitions of gender. And I was looking at one website that I think is just very indicative of the dual definition and actually a kind of a contradictory way that things are presented. This website talks about genders and sexualities, and I really think this is representative of how a lot of people in our culture view this kind of thing today. It gives definitions for sexuality, and then they have a section here on gender and sex. And I thought this was interesting because it actually gives definitions for these words. But the fascinating thing is that when you look at the definition for sex, it actually says your assigned gender at birth and or the gender of your reproductive organs. So they're actually defining sex here in terms of gender, and they're saying that your sex is your assigned gender, and how many would there be at birth? What are the choices at birth? Male or female. So you can see here there's a binary definition of gender, but then in the next definition where they actually define gender itself, they kind of change that definition, and it says where you feel that you personally fall on the spectrum between male and female. Commonly, people identify as male or female, but some fall in the middle or move throughout the spectrum. So when they talk about gender identity and all these different genders, I think what they're really saying is where do you fall on the spectrum, and that some people make it sound too simple. That being said, I think our culture has a way of overcomplicating things. And I think you can see that this is actually something I think a lot of people have pointed out. But I looked this up on Amazon, and it is kind of funny and ironic. There's a t-shirt they're selling that says there are more than two genders. But then when you look here at the choices for kinds of shirts you can get, they have fit type, and it says there is one for men and one for women. So you actually see both examples and definitions of gender coming out here right on this this Amazon page. So the Christian point of view, I realize that so many in our culture are slamming it as being hateful. However, it is rooted in a truth claim that I think can be backed up by experience and many things that we still talk about today. The idea that there is such a thing as male and female, that's essentially all that Christians are saying. And are some men maybe a little bit more in touch with certain feminine qualities or something like that? Okay, yeah, absolutely. Not all men are exactly the same. Not all women are exactly the same. But when all is said and done, the idea that there is man and woman is something that is not irrational. And it's actually a category that our dictionaries still talk about today, and science still talks about today. But it really is a confusion of terminology and worldview, and I think that's what's being brought out here. And let me look toward the end of the article. It says, the sign itself isn't being inclusive, and it's not the representation of Medford, Dallas told WBZ. The message encourages other people to act on it, that if you don't belong to male or female gender, like somebody like myself that's in between, if I'm walking down the street, is someone following me and will try something? So the point is this person is identifying as something other than as strictly male or female, and they feel threatened by this kind of sign and the kind of language that the church is using. But again, the pastor was actually saying, we're not trying to be hateful, and they're not trying to promote violence and hurting people, belittling people. But there is a big question in all of this, and I want to go back to that. Is this a good idea to have a sign the way that this is posed? Male and female, created he them, Genesis 5:2, gender identity solved. And I'm sure people are going to have very different opinions on whether this is a good sign or not. One thing I will just say, though, is I think, a lot of Christians say they really do love people, even people that believe differently and live differently. But I think a really good way to show that we love people is to actually develop the kinds of relationships where we can actually talk to them and have good conversations, deep conversations. So one good thing that you can do if you really want to show love to people is to invite them to your house, have dinner with them. There's a really good example of this with Rosaria Butterfield, who wrote a book called The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. And she was part of the LGBTQ community years ago and was living a lesbian lifestyle. And a pastor actually befriended her, got to know her, and he and his wife would invite Rosaria to their house for dinner, and they would have conversations. And that was really an act of love, of really demonstrating love, that I do want to spend time with you. I think we see that with Jesus too. Now, it doesn't mean we don't call people to repentance. So I understand the point of a sign like this, that the idea is it's trying to make a point, and it's trying to say to our culture, which is very confused, look, it's actually very simple. There is male and female. But I think if we really want to do a great job of expressing love, while we can make truth claims like that and maybe have signs like that, you can tell me if you think it's a good idea. I think we need to back up our message with really showing people that we do care, we do love them in the things that we're saying. And that's why I encourage people to actually do things like spend time with people where you can actually have good conversations with them. Maybe even invite a person into your home where you can talk about things, try to understand their story, where they're coming from, their experiences, but then explain what you believe and why you believe what you believe. So it was an interesting situation. I'd love to hear, honestly, what you think about all of this. Do you think the church was right in its approach? I understand our culture tends to flip out now about everything that doesn't fit their worldview, and a lot of Christians in some ways rightfully feel threatened by this. At the same time, we always have to ask ourselves, are we doing things in the wisest way possible? So those are some thoughts running through my mind in all of this. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. But thank you so much for taking some time to look at this issue with me and to listen to some of my thoughts from a Frisch perspective.